calling all Lasso and leadership fans. Join us on this journey to better understand a kinder and more compelling way to lead. We're going to take you on a journey through a hit series, Ted Lasso, and explore what leadership lessons exist. And believe me, there are tons. Now, spoiler alert, or perhaps a bit of advance notice, we will assume that you've seen each episode that we tackle, and we're aiming for each of these to be about 15 minutes long.
Yeah, just some quick hits for us. Thanks for joining. This is episode 2 of our podcast where we tackle episode 2. My name is Garth Nichols and I'm vice principal at Havergal College, located in Toronto, Ontario. It's on Treaty 6 land. And I'm the co-founder of Core 21, a year-long professional development experience for educators in independent schools in Ontario.
Awesome. Garth, I'm Jason Rogers, and I often forget to say who I am, what I do, but I'm the head of school at Rundle, and simply I'm a huge Ted Lasso enthusiast. I'm so excited to share this love of Ted and leadership with the world. So we put this podcast together really just so that Garth and I can nerd out once a week about the series Ted Lasso and everything about it and leadership. And we're going to have fun pulling out some of the leadership lessons that we may have noticed and that are frankly underappreciated sometimes when we have conversations about Lasso. And they're going to be really fun. So basically, we've created a public Ted Lasso fan club with 2 members so far, hopefully a lot more to come, and want to start a global conversation about this kind of leadership. Over to you, Garth.
Yeah. And in terms of a global conversation, we're looking for voices to bring in. So we hope this series will be applicable both in and beyond the educational sector, because that's where Jason and I kind of live and work. So we're looking for voices. We have some lined up already, which is super excited. But we also want to hear from you. And in fact, Jason, I have listener feedback for us.
What? Already? Yeah. This is only episode 2, Garth. That's unbelievable.
Well, it's a colleague of mine named, we call him Coach Mike. He listened to the entire episode and he said, the episode really resonated for him because of something he brings to both his work, both at Havergal College, but also he works for Ultimate Frisbee Canada. And it reminded him of this saying, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I thought that's a great sort of addendum to the harder I work, the luckier I get, which is what we tackled in episode 1.
Seriously, Garth, on my end, I could only convince my mom to listen. And she said she almost got through the whole thing. And I mean, that's a rave review from her. So hopefully a few others got the whole way through.
Hi,
what's
Mom.
coming up?
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, no doubt. Maybe somewhere in these 34 episodes, we'll get a little bit more feedback from you, but I'm glad you heard from somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, we started episode 1 when we were exploring the scene where Ted says, I find the harder I work, the luckier I get. We did leave our listeners with 2 provocations. One of them was to find a way to use the phrase, the harder I work, the luckier I get, to talk to their direct reports, talk to the people who they lead, talk to their colleagues, and how maybe how that phrase helps them in their role. And so that was one of the provocations. And the second provocation that we left them with was to consider what they have on their walls. What do they, because Jason, you talked about the organization of Ted Lasso's office in episode 1. And so we asked the question, what do you have? What symbols, what signaling do you have in your office? So I thought, Jason, why don't you, because I know you do, why don't you share with us something that you have?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, for those who are listening and watching, you'll be able to see this. But if you're just listening, imagine an 8-sided silver die. And this die sits right on my desk all of the time and sat there for 7 years. And what this signifies is, 8 years ago, we had a really challenging year here at Rundle. We had several massive tragedies and we all went through a lot. Coming into the year that followed that, our assistant head, Gary Sylvan, gave everybody on our leadership team, there's 8 of us, one of these dies with 8 sides. And he simply said, make sure this sits on your desk. When we come across trouble again, I want you to pick it up and remember there's 7 other sides to this die. There's 8 of us. You can reach out to any of us at any time, make sure we're all here to support each other. And I think, in our leadership lives, it's so often said leadership is lonely, and it's totally true. It can be lonely if and when you forget to reach out to your friends in leadership. And Garth, you've been a good friend of mine for a long time, and I see you as one of those sides of the die. It just reminds me that I've got to reach out to people when I need help. And I think we all need a little bit of help along the way. What about you, Garth? What do you got over there?
Well, it's so beautiful. Like, what a colleague. It is. Yeah. It's great. Yeah. I have something that an old colleague of mine shared with me when I left one of the schools I was working at. And she gave me a beautiful, beautiful compass. and the intent, and we had a great conversation around it, was, you're going to go off and you're going to do some good things, and you've got some ideas around where education can and should go. She said, just don't lose your way. Stay the course, so to speak. And in giving it to me, it was just one of those things that I thought, what a beautiful message that I can carry with me. And over time, it just becomes imbued with more meaning. I'm in, part of my role at Havergal is experiential education, and I run an organization within Havergal called the Forum for Change, and the compass rose is our symbol.
Yeah.
And we speak that. So this whole idea of navigating, keeping to the path, welcoming other voices, bringing in more, it gets imbued with such amazing meaning for me. So that is my sort of symbol that I go to for leadership.
I think when we put these symbols out there, we really underestimate the power of what it will mean to the people who are around. I mean, I've got a few of them in my office, and I know most of the people I work around have them. But I think as leaders, if we're able to provide that symbology or that metaphor, something to come back to when times are tough, I think those are the things that will, steady us and keep us moving forward. So, I challenge, our listeners to think about the symbols that are currently around them and what reminders they have, and maybe things that they can provide to others in their circle, to inspire them and remind them of where they're headed.
Yeah, and I think Ted Lasso does a really good job of that, because there's just these little nuggets of phrases, and where you can boil something down to a phrase, like we look at that as the term minescence. If you can boil it down to a phrase, it becomes more top of mind, and as you pull it apart, it becomes deeper and more nuanced. So these phrases, these symbols, I think are really, really important. So anyway, let's get on to episode 2. And before we do, I've changed my favorite character.
Go figure, Garth.
Yeah.
Who is it now?
Yeah, it's Rebecca.
Yeah.
particularly in this episode, I love the way that she starts to hint at how, she's struggling, because she's starting to really like Ted. She's starting to see Ted's vision and his direction, but she's still, I hired him to take the club down. I hired him for less than noble reasons, and you can see her start to wrestle with that in that episode. And I thought, yeah, she's my fave.
Yeah, and I think
your favorite is still Roy Kent?
I think it's always going to be Roy Kent. Actually, we'll talk about this throughout this, but I mean, what we see in Roy in this episode is, first of all, his humanity starts to come through just a little bit, and he wants to be a good leader, and he wants to be showing the way. And we start to see this as an episode unfolds. And yeah, I just can't get off it. Roy's my guy. So we'll see if that changes throughout the season.
So episode 2 is called Biscuits. Yeah, Jason, what'd you see? What do you want to pull out here?
So I think for me, if I was to retitle this episode, because I think that's some of what we're doing throughout this podcast, is I would just call it simply food fight. Okay. First, what I saw was two themes emerging. One is ability of food to bring people together. Right. We see that with Rebecca in the office and the biscuits or the cookies. And we also see the birthday cake for Sam, which I think is a really, really cool moment. And how Ted finds a way to celebrate even in the face of loss, and how others are, having a look at that with some criticism. I think food is a central, tenant in a lot of what goes on throughout this series. Second part of that, food fight, is conflict. Ted says to Rebecca, let this be the first time we disagree, when Rebecca doesn't want to do cookies or biscuits with the boss every morning. She simply says, that's a waste of time. When he comes into the office, provides a biscuit in a beautiful little box, and it's delicious. He says, we'll do this every morning. And Rebecca simply says, that's a terrible idea. And I think there's a healthy level of tension in that, where there's disagreement. There's 2 other times in this episode which I think are really important when we look at disagreement. One is a comment box, right? Ted and Beard take that comment box and they put it in the locker room. And one of my favorite moments in the entire episode is when they're in the pub having a drink. Remember that, Garth, when they're going through the comments? Describe that for our listeners. What's your...
So they're sitting and Ted's all excited. He says, okay, get the box out, let's go. And it's just beer after beer after beer. They're sort of steeling themselves for what is about to come. And I just think that's a magic. I love that you pulled that out, because that's a magic scene for sure.
Yeah. And I think, if you remember it, there's wanker, one after the other. And then somebody says shower pressure. It's terrible. Well, it would be easy for Ted and Beard to just simply say, what does that matter? But no, they go and they change a shower presser, and they get an early win with their team. They prove that they're listening, and they care, and even the littlest details are worthy of recognition. And so back to something that, I read once in a book about hugging the messenger. Instead of pushing them away when there's criticism, bring them closer, figure out, Coach Popovich from the Spurs, he's a
Yes.
grizzly old coach, but he really does believe in hugging the messenger and saying, like, there's got to be value in that feedback. And the third place where I think there's really healthy conflict, even though it's subtle, is when Ted gives Sam an army man. Now, the army man is very symbolic for Ted. It means protection. It means family. It means friend. But for Sam, it brings back terrible memories of his homeland, Nigeria, and what the army meant in Nigeria. And Sam simply says, I can't accept this because it brings back bad memories. Now, Ted, you can see it in him. He doesn't take offense. He just takes that moment to sit back and think about what that might mean for Sam and how important it is. So having healthy conflict in the space, I think, is really appropriate. What about you, Garth?
I think that's one of the beautiful things about the show too, is, Ted puts himself out there from a very North American lens, a childhood lens, and then we are confronted in the show by these different perspectives, these different worldviews when it comes to something like the figure of an army. And I think the show does a really good job of demonstrating you will fail as a leader. Sometimes your messages won't land. So I think that's a significant scene. And I want to go back to the shower pressure thing, because actually John Cotter, who's like this, well-known change guru from Harvard, he says, you have to manufacture small wins, and that's going to build trust, and it's going to build the culture that you want. I think it's another great example. So thanks for pointing that out. For me, it was in the scene early on in the show, in this episode, and they're all in the field, and Ted and Coach Beard are watching the practice.
Oh yeah.
And, it goes back to say, like, what are we doing here? And how's this going to go? And Coach Beard says, do you remember what you said to me in the first day of coaching in Wichita State? And Ted turns and says, cut your ponytail. And Beard says, no, relax. They're just kids. And those are 3 lines, right? 2 from Beard, 1 from Ted, but they're really rich. So first of all, we know that Coach Beard used to have a ponytail. He has lived a different life, and that life gets sort of unpacked over the course of the 3 seasons. But it's that phrase, relax, comma, they're just kids. And I love that for so many reasons, because it speaks to, these kids, we got to get in touch with why they love the game. Going back to that last episode, we talked about what's your why. And, for playing soccer, if you don't have that love of the game to get out there, if you can't like plug into that as a coach, you're not going to have that much success. So I love that idea. And then you expand that to we're all kids. Like at one point in time, we were all kids. So we have a way to relate to other people. We just have to find it. And the third thing that I love about that phrase is the first word that Beard says, which is relax. Relax. They're just kids. And how we show up emotionally, how we arrive with our and present ourselves as leaders is really important. It's kind of like yelling, relax, everything's going to be fine. That's never going to be right. You're not sending the right message. So the way that we show up as leaders is really, really important. So those three lines are really significant to me.
And I think it reminds me of something somebody once told me too, Garth. It's like, I think it probably was directed at me. I was like running through the school trying to solve something, and somebody said, you need to slow down. Not even a surgeon runs to the operating room, nor does a firefighter towards a fire. And I think it was a really good lesson for me, knowing that people are watching, they're observing, and they're following the lead. So if the leader is running around stressed out, all of those things are bleeding into your culture. And so I love that point, Garth. I think it's so profound. So anyways, let's pivot here just a little bit, because I think there's one more part of the episode that I think is really important to address and talk about, because I think it's topical and of the day, if you will. So at one point, I really think that Ted is saying to Rebecca, let's get to know each other better. He puts the biscuit on the desk and he says, all right, boss, it's time for us to get to know each other better. And he says, first concert, best concert, you go first. And Rebecca replies really quickly, I think, says something about Spice Girls, basically blows him off. And then he has a chance to say his first concert, best concert, right? He gets into Kenny Rogers and we get a little bit of Gambler out of him. And I think sometimes about, Coach Babcock, for instance, right now, like we're hearing this in the news, going into people's personal lives from a place of power. and authority and going too far. And so where do you draw the line, and how do you manage that? And how do you let, other people in your organization take the lead as opposed to you, and show you where those boundaries are, and then you respect those boundaries. So what I love about this, Garth, is this is a place where no boundaries are really crossed. Everybody can talk. And if you don't have a first or best concert, you can simply say, I don't like music. Then you know something about them as well, which I think is really important. So Garth, you can entertain it. Can I jump in? First concert, best concert. You go first.
Okay. So I misread the question. So
I don't think you follow any rules. Yeah,
I know. I thought it was going to be last concert, best. My last concert was Beyonce, the Queen Bee, in Toronto, which was fantastic. But my very first concert that I have, really good memories of, like I remember being there, I remember loving the music, is Phil Collins, and I still love Phil Collins. And the best concert I've ever been to is a band by the name of Elbow. They're from Manchester, and they come to Toronto, every 3 or 4 years. And they're a beautiful band. And at this concert, not one, not two, 3 people got down on one knee and proposed to their, soon-to-be partner. And I thought, that is how powerful this music is. Great connection from the stage to the fans. Great fan vibe. Beautiful, beautiful music too. So Elbow and Phil Collins.
And see, what I'm picking up here, Garth, is I want to spend more time. I want to have a pint with you and talk about these and get to know you better, right? Like isn't that about connection, trust, and leadership? I think that's all one. So I'll share mine before we sign off today, because I know we're pushing up on time. Mine is actually truly Kenny Rogers. My first concert, went to Minot, North Dakota. My dad told me, last name's Rogers. My dad told me he was my uncle and I should enjoy the music. Love it. And it's true. I thought he was my uncle well into my teens. I never really understood why Uncle Kenny never came around to visit, but that was that. He was a little distant, busy on the road, And my best concert is this guy named Rain Wolf. He's from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and he just brings rock and roll. It's just unbelievable. You need to see him live. Rain Wolf, look him up. I'll put him in the episode notes. And if you ever have a chance to see him, he just puts on the best show I've ever seen. And he'd remind you just a little bit of the busker in Ted Lasso, if you can believe it. So pretty cool tie in there. So where does that leave us?
Well, we're going to wrap it up. We'd like to leave our listeners with something to think about, something to chew on, literally and figuratively. So this one is, it's food for thought here. In what way can you use food to bring your teams together, have really good, close conversations? And the other one, too, is to just relax. We want you to think about how you show up in meetings, how you plan your day, so you can be really present for those that you're leading. So those are our 2 sort of provocations heading into our 3rd episode.
There you go. We'll be back next week with episode 3. And a reminder, if you like what you've heard, rate the podcast and share it with your friends. I know I'll be sharing it with my family again, and hopefully my mom will get the whole way through this 18-minute podcast. And if we're ever going to get Sudeikis on here, we're going to need your help. So thanks for listening, and keep leading the Lasso way.
Thanks, everyone.